Today, we dive into quarterback watch. After a tough day at the office for Paxton, Lynch, and Trevor, Siemian, we break down how Denver's latest injuries will affect things moving forward. And with Broncos Camp in full swing, we go 3 up, 3 down. You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle. It is time to drop some knowledge. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital, and with me, as always, Will Keys, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. Will, we were just talking off air about how, you're sitting there during the dead time on the NFL calendar trying to think up content and get creative, and now, when it rains, it pours with camp back in full swing.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's just nice to have real NFL football to look at and to talk about and read about and listen to. And yeah. I'm really happy that I don't have to keep spending my Thursday evenings watching the Canadian Football League on ESPN 6 or whatever, just to get my allotted fix of football, whether it's NFL or Canadian or Australian or whatever.
Well, it's like speculation is fun, but at a certain point, you want something to sink your teeth into. And, that's why the draft is fun, free agency is fun, but training camp is when it really comes out and we're able to let our hair down, so to speak, and dive in.
Right. There's only so many articles we can write about, who's going to be the third wide receiver. And at a certain point, we want to see who actually does it.
Yep. And at Mile High Huddle, we usually take the opportunity during the dead time to kind of take a step back and do more of our deep dive type analysis, film room stuff, X's and O's. So we take that opportunity and it works out well, but it's as much of students of the game as we are, there's nothing like covering events in football as it's going. And even though this is just training camp and they're practicing, I mean, things are happening, Will.
It's true. Things happen really every minute of every hour of every day in training camp. We saw it before training camp happened when Devontae Booker went down with a wrist injury. We saw it 2 days into training camp. We had big news with Shane Ray, and it'll keep coming. Hopefully not all bad news, but some type of news.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Booker and Ray here in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of today's show, brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. Over 180,000 different titles to choose from. You get a free book with your trial, 180,000 different titles for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And it's something I use every single day. Carl's a big proponent of it. Will, Nick, we love it. They sponsor the show, and that's great. But before we ever even took them on as a sponsor, I've been using Audible for a good year to get my reading in without necessarily having the time to sit down and block everything else out and turn those pages. And remember, it's a great way to support the show. The time we take to sit down and put together these episodes for you, this sponsorship allows us to do that. So patronize them, help us out, support the show. Go to audibletrial.com/huddleup. Get a free book, give it a try. If you don't like it after 30 days, or before 30 days, I should say, cancel. But anyway, we're very grateful to Audible for sponsoring the show. Now, Huddle Up is here to give you a deep dive on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, and we need your help. We can't grow without you. Make sure you take a second and rate and comment on the show, whether you're an iTunes listener or a Stitcher. Very important to us growing the show, and really it's about reaching new listeners. Follow the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Also make sure you're following at Mile High Huddle on Twitter. And make sure you're subscribing too, because Broncos football is back in full swing. And you guys know we're going to be dropping knowledge on every tidbit of buzz that comes out of Dove Valley several times a week. And you're not going to want to miss a single episode. All right, so we're tracking this episode 4 days into Broncos camp. Will Keys has been cranking out some of the best camp content, in my opinion, on the interwebs with his camp notebooks. Insightful, it's funny. Make sure you're checking the site every day for those recaps. I've LOL'd on everyone I've read so far. But Denver Super Bowl hangover last year, it wasn't something suffered by the team alone. Fans seem to be somewhat burned out on the Broncos. I saw it in the traffic and the social media engagement at Mile High Huddle throughout the entire season. And you can talk to anybody who covered the Broncos and the NFL for that matter, but especially the Broncos. Things were just weird last year. Camp attendance was down last year. This year, however, just as the Broncos are reinvigorated as a team, so are the fans. You guys have been showing up to camp in record numbers, and on Sunday, day 4, you shattered the attendance record, getting close to 6,000. So keep it going because it's feeding these players and coaches. But anyway, let's start off with quarterback watch. The Broncos didn't don any pads until the 3rd day of camp. Day 3, they wore shells, and the only difference between shells and full pads are the leg and hip pads. Then on day 4, the team was fully padded up, and as Vance Joseph said afterwards, it was a man's practice. And we'll talk about how that affected things. Before we talk about the quarterbacks on day 4, though, let me back up and set the stage, because the first 2 days of camp, before the pads went on, I think it's safe to say objectively that Lynch won, maybe by a hair. Nothing with authority, but by a hair. If you're keeping score by days, Lynch started off 2-0. Siemian seemed to be pressing a bit early on, kind of feeling the pressure from maybe, the only way I chalk it up, some of the momentum Lynch had built up during the offseason. But on day 3, the shells went on, and Siemian struck back with authority. By far, it was his most dominant, really the most dominant QB performance of the summer for the Broncos. He stayed on schedule, showed command of the offense, took some chances vertically down the field, connecting with Emmanuel Sanders on more than one deep touchdown. It was encouraging, and I started thinking, hey, maybe someone is finally going to start creating some separation. Lynch had his moments, but wasn't as consistent. And then on day 4, the players and coaches cranked the intensity up a notch in the full pads, and both players struggled. Lynch threw a pick 6 in the red zone to Bradley Roby, at which point, and Will covered this in the camp notebook, John Elway, who had been watching practice, just walked off the field. Was it in disgust? Was it in frustration? We can't say for sure, but if I had to wager on it, I'd say he was a little bit disappointed at the very least. Siemian threw a pick 6 of his own, so both guys out of sorts, and the no-fly zone was absolutely dominant. They took exception to Siemian, and the first-team offense, having a big day the day before, came out and played some man's football on day 4. And I want to get to a few clips from Vance Joseph, but as the man who wrote the day 4 notebook, Will, give us your gut reaction.
I've been really kind of hesitant to use the word evaluate or try to evaluate any of the guys until the pads were on, which they weren't until today. But now that they are, I think it's pretty clear that the offense is, especially against a defense like the Broncos have, they're going to get bullied. And even in the passing game, you don't think of the passing game as being too affected by pads, but right. I mean, it really is a whole different game, because if you're sending a wide receiver across the middle and you're telling him, all right, run a crossing route in front of TJ Ward or Darian Stewart, you'd much rather do it without pads than with pads, especially with those two safeties. So it is a big deal, and it's big in their heads too. So I think overall, as far as the quarterbacks go, you want to see Paxton be a little more consistent, because he strung together 2 really good days to start training camp. Yep. And then he dipped a little bit on the 3rd day when you saw everybody says Trevor won the 3rd day. I don't really like to keep track of it day by day, because that's definitely not what the coaching staff does. They don't chalk, one tally Paxton Lynch, 1 tally Trevor Siemian, and then at the end of training camp and preseason decide who the starter is based on who has, more notches on their side. It's kind of a whole body of work type decision, but you want to see him be more consistent from day to day, and you want to see Trevor Siemian be a little more aggressive. And that's happened so far, and that kind of, you saw Siemian and Lynch try to be a little more aggressive today, and that resulted in a few more interceptions, which I don't, it doesn't really bother me, especially in camp. If you're pushing the ball down the field and it gets picked off, that's kind of what camp is for, and that happens. It's not a game, and, that's all right. And, the pick 6s are a little more frustrating, especially if they're on short routes or if it's late or if it's just a bad decision. You don't want to see that, but if they're pushing the ball down the field and it gets picked off, especially if it goes off a receiver's hands or if it's a tip drill pick, you can live with that.
To me, what I sense was part of the problem in day 4 with the quarterbacks is, the defense came back with a mission after kind of getting a few put on him the day before by Siemian and Emmanuel Sanders. But really, the cracks I think we're seeing in these quarterbacks, I don't think you can just chalk it up to the physicality and the pads going on. I think both of them are feeling the pressure. On Paxton Lynch's side, he's enduring the whole I'm a first-round pick and all the outside noise that it's time for me to take command of this job and all that. He's feeling that. He's feeling that pressure, and it's external and it's also internal. Trevor Siemian, on the other hand, he's feeling the pressure because he's hearing all that same stuff, and he's fighting and doing everything he can to hold on to the job and also continue to make a good impression on this new coaching staff. So I think a lot of it is pressure, and the thing about, NFL quarterback, it's the most pressure-infused job in sports. These guys have to be able to manage and handle pressure if they're going to be successful on game day. And training camp's just a drop in the bucket to that type of pressure. So just like on the field, if a guy in week 2 throws an interception in the third quarter, he's got to be able to come back on that next possession and forget it and just move the ball down the field, show some poise and a short memory. And in that same sense, Will, I'm hoping both these quarterbacks, for the sake of the competition, can shake off today's practice, come back on Monday, and really throw down.
Right. No, I think that's a good point that you bring up about Lynch being under a lot of pressure, because I think he is. And it's not really, necessarily his fault, but he is a first-round pick. They traded up for him. We like to, go through the history all the time when we're talking about Paxton Lynch. But when you're talking about a first-round quarterback, you want a guy to be on the field by year 2 especially. Yep. And you don't necessarily want your first-round quarterback to even be involved in a competition, this late into his rookie contract. But that's the case. And, there's internal pressure. We've heard plenty of reports about Elway and the front office and maybe even the coaching staff wanting Paxton to step up and really get a hold of the starting job. And that hasn't necessarily happened. He had 2 really good practices, I think, to start off training camp. But it's hard, and it's hard to keep a consistent, body of work against a defense like the Broncos. And everybody talks about it makes you so much better when you're going against such a really good defense that, it's like swinging a baseball bat with the donut on. It's much lighter when you get out there and you take it off. But I don't know. I think sometimes it can be frustrating for the offense to not really get out of there with confidence, because it's hard to make plays against. It's really hard to make plays and complete passes against that defense. And if you don't have that rapport built up and you don't have chemistry between your wide receivers and the quarterback and the offensive line's getting beat all the time, it can be frustrating. And I think even if you're going against a not as good of a defense, you don't have necessarily that confidence that, we've done it in training camp, but we can do it here in games too.
And that's a great point. And I think it's one that gets missed often is when you're in training camp and you're practicing every day and it's full contact and it's full speed, an offense or defense, but in this case we're talking about the Broncos offense, they need to be able to have a measuring stick. They need to be able to say, show some kind of progress. Here's where we did well. But if every single practice they're getting dominated by the defense, it's hard to gauge where you're at. And that's certainly going to be a struggle and something the coaches are going to have to figure out how to evaluate and analyze through that prism. But when it comes to Paxton Lynch, the bottom line is this. We can talk about it's his time, what the front office wants, what the coaches want, what the fan base wants. But at the end of the day, this guy, if he's really as talented as his first-round pedigree would lead you to believe, and I do believe he has that talent, but he's got to show it. He's got to show it out on the field, and it's got to be night and day. It's got to be clear, a clear separation. Let him show it. Let his talent come out. And if it doesn't, you got Trevor Siemian there, and he's showing that each and every day. Lynch, if you falter, guess who's going to be there to pick up the slack? It's Trevor Siemian. But it was interesting on Saturday. Coach Joseph got a little frustrated by an exchange with D-Mac from 104.3 The Fan, Darren McKee. Joseph had just finished up explaining a similar topic that Will just mentioned a few minutes ago, that he's not going day by day evaluating which guys won which practice, that the competition is going to happen over time, that the evaluation is going to be considered as a body of work, not a day-to-day measuring of knots. D-Mac didn't necessarily like that answer. Here's what happened.
What's the best way to ask you about the quarterbacks then? you've already done that. Every day I've been up here for 3 days. It's not going to change daily, okay? And that's important because you don't want to leave here every day thinking, well, boy, Paxton's the guy, and tomorrow Trevor's the guy. We can't do that. It's got to be a collective evaluation over time. That's why, again, guys, time is a good thing because now we can have a full evaluation of both guys.
Now, although you can hear it in Joseph's response, if you were watching the interview, you could tell that exchange ticked Joseph off a little bit. He kind of calmed down after a second and got back to his more reasonable coach speak tonality. But, Will, you can tell that the daily QB questions are starting to wear a little bit on Joseph's nerves, and they're only 4 days into camp. But until it gets resolved, I mean, we in the media, we're going to keep asking about it, looking for any clues, any insight that might serve as some kind of harbinger of the future. That's why the sooner they can name a starter, the better, but the quarterbacks aren't making that any easier on them.
Right. I totally get Vance Joseph's perspective on this because I'm sure he gets really tired of the quarterback questions because I know I get tired of the quarterback questions and I'm not the head coach of the Broncos and I don't have to answer them all day. But it's frustrating, too, kind of from a non-coach, non-media perspective, just because there's so many things you can look at on this team that aren't quarterback-related. And, Vance Joseph already gave a timetable. He said they're probably not going to have a starter declared until the third preseason game. That's kind of a rough estimate that he gave the media before training camp started and said it's basically kind of, a ceasefire between Vance Joseph and the media and saying, just chill out. I'll tell you when we're, roughly when we're going to name a starter. It's this date exactly. And still people are coming back and saying well, does one guy have an upper hand? Is Paxton Lynch the starter yet? Is Trevor Siemian the starter yet? Is Kyle Sloter the starter yet? What's Chad Kelly doing?
Right.
Didn't we agree on this? It's not going to, there's no decision until September. I don't get it, but quarterback drama sells, and that's why hashtag the decision is a thing. But, I think it's really interesting that, you posted something about Brandon Perna. I think you shared one of his videos about not being let into training camp this year.
Broncos PR wouldn't let him in.
Right. I think we need to get rid of one of the 4 threes, the credentials, until they stop doing hashtag the decision and Team Trevor and Team Paxton Brandon Perna takes their place until then, because I think they really need to step back and learn a lesson about that.
They do a good job as far as covering the team. I mean, they've basically a year ago they forsook is that the right word? Forsook? Is that, I don't even know if that's a word, but they basically passed on covering all the other great sports teams in Denver to focus 90-something% of their coverage and content on the Denver Broncos, and they do a good job of it. They have a lot of good analysts, but I'm with you on this. I take exception to the decision. Team Paxton, Team Trevor, it's so transparent, it's so obvious that they're just trying to gin up and create. I wouldn't even say they're trying to create a sensation or blow this media story up. They're basically trying to drive traffic and sell some T-shirts, in other words, and it doesn't help the team in any way. We're already talking about the quarterbacks, but it doesn't really help the team to have guys picking Team Trevor or Team Paxton. But here's another thing: after practice, Coach Joseph offered up a little motivation, a little extra juice to his signal callers when he was asked about how he felt about Siemian and Lynch's performance on day 4. Here was his response.
Yeah, I like what I saw. Not really. Not really. Both guys had issues today. I didn't like what I saw today. Honest. They both struggled today. I didn't like it.
Will, these quarterbacks, they're going to hear it from Mike McCoy and Bill Musgrave after that practice, but I don't think it can hurt to hear a little bit of noise from their head coach from the outside. Outside the meeting rooms, a little pressure in that sense. The most important thing will be to see, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but to me the key aspect to this whole thing is going to see how they each respond on Monday, because they both struggled with their body language. They just didn't look like they just weren't in the zone. When they did have setbacks, they didn't try to overcome them, or I don't know. Body language is so important if you're going to be a leader, and a quarterback has to be one of the leaders on the team. And if someone throws a pick or makes a bad read or holds on to the ball too long and they get chastised by the coach, don't drop your head and roll your shoulders and look down at your feet. keep your head up high and move on to the next play.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I like that Vance Joseph was pretty direct about it. He was a quarterback back at Colorado. Mike McCoy was a quarterback. Bill Musgrave, I think, was a quarterback as well. So that's a lot of former quarterbacks to have on an offensive staff. So they definitely know what they want. And when they don't get what they want out of the position, they're going to be pretty direct about it. But, we talked about it earlier. I think at this point, Trevor Siemian's a little more adept at shrugging off a bad day because, he had bad days not only in training camp but in the preseason. Remember, he had that big pick against San Francisco that he did a good job of rebounding from in the next game, and then ultimately earning the starting job. He had bad games in the regular season, and ultimately finished it out on a pretty strong note against the Raiders. So I think his experience allows him to shrug off a bad day. And at this point, we need to know if Paxton Lynch can do the same because, last season in the regular season, he started off well and then he kind of let a few bad plays snowball on him and really started out kind of below where he was at the end of the preseason. And after that Tampa Bay game, it kind of just took a gradual decline. And, he's here now, he's playing well, but, how does he rebound from not just one bad day, but a couple bad days strung together? Does it turn into a trend, or, is he able to shake it off and get back on track?
Having mental fortitude is just as important as an NFL for an NFL quarterback as having a big arm or, making the right read. And Paxton Lynch still needs, I think, to develop that particular skill set. And let's hope, at least for now, that these opportunities and the coaches can kind of put up the mirror and say, hey, look, dude, every rep is captured on tape. And they go and they analyze them each day after practice, and they can show them, look, hey, man, you shouldn't be dropping your eyes like that when, you threw that pick six. It's one thing to be fired up and disappointed in yourself, but come on, man, people are looking at you. Your teammates are watching you. So that mental fortitude, let's hope that the training camp process and preseason will help iron that out for him and get him back to a place where he's a lot more confident. Now, one thing, I made a video about this earlier in the week as far as early takeaways from camp. One thing that I really noticed early on is the coaching staff's priority to focus on the red zone. The Broncos struggled to, let's face it, punch it inside the 20s last year and score points. Now, the 2017 Broncos opened up camp in the red zone doing team drills, shortening the field, forcing the QB to make tight throws and quick decisions, getting them into a groove. The Broncos have to be able to run the ball in the red zone this year, and with the new personnel and the move to a power scheme, I think that they will. On day 4, though, again, both QBs struggled, including in the red area with Lynch throwing that pick six to Roby. Coach Joseph talked about why the red zone in particular can be easier for a defense to defend. I think it's important to understand this, especially if there's no threat of a rushing attack. Here's what he said.
Yeah, it's a good defense, and the days go back and forth. Yesterday, offense did pretty good. And when you're in a red zone, guys, and you're not really going live, those runs, it's probably 3 or 4 yard runs, but you can't tell because no one's being tackled. It's hard to throw the ball in the red zone because DBs understand it's only 2 routes, inside and outside. There's no deep balls. So to throw against Talib and Chris Harris in the red zone, it's tough. And Roby, he sits on routes. You got 4 yards to the ball. He ain't going anywhere. So you saw when he picked it, it's going to be a touchdown. So it's tough to throw the ball in the red zone. So running the ball is a must for us.
All right, well, honestly, I think with Mike McCoy's play calling combined with the new personnel the Broncos have up front and in the backfield, in fact, they're not going to struggle in the red zone as badly this year. I think you're going to see a big improvement in that department. Still, when the play call is the throw, the quarterback has to be smarter with the football. He has to make his reads pre-snap as best he can and really focus on protecting the possession. And frankly, we're seeing one of the reasons why the Broncos hired Coach Joseph when it comes to this red zone focus and some of the other things he's mixed up, kind of shaking things up away from kind of the traditional NFL training camp schedule and approach. I think we're seeing why one of the reasons why the Broncos hired him. That type of innovation and focus, I think, is also inspiring his players out of the gates.
Yeah, I think he's done a good job, and we saw it on the first day when he ended training camp practice early by, I think, like a whole hour. So he's definitely a big proponent, you can tell, about keeping his players fresh. And I think putting the red zone drills first ahead of the regular team drills is actually a really good idea, because when you're only running at the most 30 yards because you've got the 20 to the goal line, and then the extra 10 yards at the end zone, you're not going to get as tired as quickly. You're not burning your legs out for the rest of practice necessarily. Yep. And so you're a little sharper when you're working on red zone plays. And then if you're not, too exhausted by that, you've still got enough juice left for the regular team drills, so you can focus well on that. And if you put those red zone plays at the end of practice, you're going to have guys that are pretty worn out, especially early in camp, and then right at the end of camp they're going to be pretty tired. So it's hard to get a really solid effort and get guys to focus 100% on those plays. And I think putting it first, it not only mentally tells them to emphasize on 20 to the goal line, but I think it helps them physically, be more sound and execute better within the 20-yard line.
Absolutely. Now, we'll mention this to start the show, but one of the unfortunate early developments in training camp was the wrist injuries suffered by Devontae Booker and Shane Ray, respectively. Both players are going to miss 6 to 8 weeks. And as disappointing as Booker's injury is, at least the Broncos still have a lot of bodies at the position, and not just bodies, but they've got some talent at running back right now, especially after signing former Patriots running back Stephen Ridley. Shane Ray's injury, much more devastating because Shaq Barrett's already missing in action, healing up from a hip injury that he suffered in a non-football related workout in May. In a league where you want 3 good edge rushers if you can, the Broncos are now down 2 of their top 3. And the next men up are Kasim Edebali, whom the Broncos are running with the first team right now, opposite of Von Miller, and Vontarius Dora. I broke down some game film on both players on Saturday for our premium members at Mile High Huddle. Check it out. The best way to support Mile High Huddle is to go premium. It costs $5 per month or $49 for the year, and you get access to our most in-depth content like our film articles, X's and O's, and any inside info we pick up along the way. But with our move to CBS Sports, it's not as apparent where to sign up. So for the next little bit, while the tech team is working out some of the bugs on the new website, we'll put the premium sign-up link in the description of each episode. But anyway, I'm not worried after going through this film study and doing... I checked out Kasim Edebali a few months ago, but I really dove deep on Saturday, and I'm not worried about him. As much as it hurts to lose Ray like that, Coach Joseph said that he's expected back week 2 at the latest. And Edebali, he's an effort guy. He's a motor guy. He's got great size. He's got an impressive get-off. Vontarius Dora, he seems to have slimmed down a little to be quicker off the snap, and he's wearing that number 59 now, Will, as you've pointed out.
It's a big deal.
It is. It can mean something, but the Broncos also waived tight end Henry Krieger-Coble. We need to make mention of this to make room for outside linebacker Danny Mason. So happy trails to HKC. Wish you the best, bud. And then the Broncos have begun to put rookie second-rounder DeMarcus Walker in the outside linebacker group. So he's working D-line and edge. And I forecasted that possibility on Friday. I took a little grief for it on Twitter. But hey, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. But anyway, Mason and Walker are going to allow the Broncos enough camp bodies, I think, through the preseason. Try and protect Von Miller as much as they can. But Will, your gut reaction to the Broncos losing Booker and Ray, and really how it affects them, where they go from here.
Yeah, and you don't have to be too humble about predicting the whole DeMarcus Walker situation. I think you definitely called that, and we saw it pretty much immediately, them putting him at outside linebacker and taking his hand off the ground. But to start off with Booker, I think it's going to be tougher for him as opposed to the team as a whole, because we've heard so much good about D'Angelo Henderson on the first 2 days. Chris Harris Jr. called him out. Not really called him out, but I guess praised him in front of the media after the second day. And I think if he's as good as everybody says he is, and if he remains as good and he heals from his, I think it's an ankle injury that he's working on right now, it's going to be tough for Booker to get snaps between Anderson, Jamal Charles, and then Henderson if he stays healthy and productive like he is right now.
Yep.
As far as Shane Ray, it's definitely frustrating. It's tough, especially with the timing of Shaq Barrett, because they're gone essentially both until week 2. So, you'd wish that at least one of them was back early. But at this point, what Vance Joseph said to the media was, you'll expect them back for week 3 when they go to Buffalo. But it's better that it happens on day 2 of camp than, week 8 of the regular season, definitely, especially, for something that's going to take 6 to 8 weeks and knock you out that long. You say, well, if that's the big injury for him this year, you really couldn't have timed it any better, I guess, to put a positive spin on it. And it's why you develop a guy like Vontarius Dora on the practice squad for a year. It's why you go out and get kind of an under the radar guy like Kasim Edebali from the Saints, who I don't know if they let him go at the wrong time or they don't really know very much about defense, which I'm not sure if they do, but
they don't.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say at this point. But that helps. So they have depth, and they have depth inside the building. They don't need to call DeMarcus Ware and try to talk him out of retirement. I think he's pretty content doing whatever he's doing. But they can definitely hold down the fort for at least a couple of weeks. And having Von Miller on the other side really makes the right outside linebacker's job a lot easier. So I think whoever you plug in there, they'll be okay for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah, that will linebacker spot is going to be. It's Kasim Edebali to start with Vontarius Dora rotating in as number 3, but it will be interesting, Will, to see, the Broncos at times, since they've moved to the 3-4, so going back to 2015, they carried 5 outside linebackers on the roster for the whole season. And so this year, it's Joe Wood's unit. Obviously, Vance Joseph is a defensive-minded coach. That's where his history is as a coach in the league. It'll be interesting to see how they prioritize that in terms of bodies when it comes to, deciding the 53-man roster. But if you look at Ken Eckenem, the undrafted rookie out of Virginia Tech, that's a guy that Eric Trickle really was high on when the Broncos signed him following the draft. Deion Hollins is a guy, Will, I know that you have some high hopes for. And then Danny Mason, this is his second stint with the team. Honestly, I think he's more of a camp body. He's there to get reps for the third team and be there, someone who can take reps during the preseason games on that third unit. But the Broncos they've had a knack over the last several years of finding undrafted and under-the-radar gems to rush the passer, and not even just from the college ranks. You look at Dakota Watson. He was an absolute beast in the preseason last year, and nobody saw it coming. So it'll be interesting once the real games start, Will, to see, get a little bit better bead in the preseason games, on exactly what the Broncos have, including in Kasim Edebali and Vontarius Dora.
You talked about it earlier with DeMarcus Walker too, but he's a guy that can take his hand off the ground. He's a big guy too. He's 280 pounds, so that's a whole 30 pounds bigger than Von Miller. So, but you can live with an outside linebacker who's a little bigger. The only real concern is if an offense figures out how to isolate him in coverage if you're putting him at, say, like the weak linebacker position. But as far as pass rushing, he can do it. He's probably best as a 3 or a 5 tech. But like I said, like Edebali, even Hollins, someone like that, or Vontarius Dora, they've got the depth there, and they get these guys for a reason. It's not just to make the last few pages of the roster look good. They have contingency plans in case this happens, and we'll see if it really pans out.
And once they get out on the grass in the preseason games, if things aren't shaping up the way they would have hoped, they can always go out and sign a guy like Dwight Freeney, or they can maybe kick the tires on Mario Williams or some of the other bigger-named veteran outside linebackers, edge rushers that are still on the market. So they've got time and the depth and the youth at that position to see how it shakes out first. But one of the bizarre developments, talking about our Do You Buy It segment, one of the bizarre developments of training camp, frankly, has been the polar trajectories of Denver's 2 rookie receivers they drafted this year. Carlos Henderson, the third-rounder, has struggled immensely and is basically running with the third team, while Isaiah McKenzie, the 5th-rounder out of Georgia, has absolutely been probably the star of training camp. Even with the pads on, that was a big question. Is he going to translate what he did in shorts to pads? And he has. And we've all been so excited to see Henderson in this offense, but he's struggling with drops, lapses in concentration, his confidence is low, anxiety. Meanwhile, McKenzie is shining in basically every opportunity he's given, including on punt returns. Here's what Coach Joseph had to say about Henderson's struggles early on.
Carlos, he's a rookie. He's trying hard. He wants to be a good player. He wants to help us on offense, but he's trying a little too hard right now. But he'll be fine. It's early.
All right, well, I hate to be too hyperbolic, but sometimes it is appropriate, and I'm going to put this out there. I'm worried about Carlos Henderson, but should I be? Or do you buy Joseph's mantra? Do you subscribe to that idea that it's still too early to get worked up about anything with regard to that rookie?
I do. I'm not worried. I do buy into everything that Vance Joseph said, so I think it's definitely a little too early to get caught up in hyperbole, but especially at wide receiver, I'd rather have a guy that's maybe pressing a little too hard and trying too hard as opposed to the other way around, which, the wide receiver position tends to produce guys like that occasionally. So I think if you have a rookie that's trying too hard, I don't think that's the end of the world, definitely. And he's contributed, even if he's not, grabbing the third wide receiver position by the horns already. He's probably the leader at kickoff returner, so he's going to see the field. He's going to make the team. He's not a practice squad guy by any means. And he had a nice reception on a shallow crossing route from Paxton Lynch today. He broke a couple tackles, picked up about 30 yards too. So it looks like he's picking up a little bit. And he's always been a guy who kind of relies on his physicality. He broke, I don't know, what was it like, broken tackles than the second leading guy in that category in college football last year. So he really thrives on being able to make guys miss and powering through guys and, that straight line speed. And that's something you can only really gauge when the pads come on. So I think once that's happened, and it has, I think he's more in his comfort zone. And I think it's probably going to show in the next week or so.
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around it. He's ridiculously talented, and he is going to have to learn how to translate what he's learned and what he knows as a receiver outside the numbers inside, I think, to make an impact, at least early on with the Broncos. He could be a long-term option, for example, to replace Emmanuel Sanders as, the Z, but really to get in on the action early, he needs to figure out how to make things happen from the slot. But meanwhile, Isaiah McKenzie is getting that done. Now, one thing that we do need to talk about before we get to our stock reports and the Mile High Mailbag is Allan Barber. Basically what happened was on the eve of training camp, the Philadelphia Eagles were on the brink of cutting veteran left guard Allan Barber. In fact, the local beat writers, including ESPN, even reported that he had been released. John Elway, sensing an opportunity, made a phone call, ended up acquiring Barber for a conditional late-round 2019 draft pick. He comes with a cost of about $2 million if he sticks to the roster in 2017. And right now, it's looking like he's not only going to make the roster, but maybe even start. I actually reached out to get some advanced metrics on Barber from Pro Football Focus and published it for our Mile High Huddle VIPs. Again, go premium. But here are the cliff notes. The dude is a mean, powerful run blocker. He's not the best pass blocking guard, but he's not terrible. He gets after it in the run game, very physical, and he's kind of like Garrett Bowles and even Ronald Leary. We're establishing a theme here. He's mean. He finishes guys on the gridiron. Now, this move, in my mind, absolutely puts Max Garcia on notice, and with Barber's experience in the league and ability, I'm calling it right now. I think he's going to end up being the starting guard opposite of Ron Leary, health willing. I don't think the team even knows yet for sure which guard spots, which guys are going to man which guard spots, because I know that Leary right now isn't totally taken to the right guard position like a duck to water. He's not super happy with where he's at, so they might switch him. But Coach Joseph confirmed that Barber is absolutely in the mix to start. Your thoughts, Will, on the Barber trade?
Well, I think the fact that that they're so close to releasing Allan Barber and John Elway put in a call anyway, I think that indicates that he was going to have a pretty good market if indeed he was released. And I think if you can get a guy like that and a starting caliber guard for a pick that's going to be in the late rounds most likely, and
2 years
it's
from now,
2 years down the road, so I don't want to say it's not a factor, but out of sight, out of mind for now at least.
Right.
And there are reports coming out of Philadelphia that one unnamed player, I hate to use unnamed sources, but one player out of the Philadelphia locker room said that they got robbed on that trade. So that's pretty encouraging from a Denver perspective. And he doesn't cost a lot. He only costs $2 million, like he said. So it's kind of puzzling that that the Eagles would even, want to get rid of him.
Right.
So I don't know if he can end up starting. That's a heck of a trade that John Elway pulled off right at the beginning of training camp.
Well, he was asked, Barber, why by the Denver media. He was asked why, in his mind, the Eagles were going to cut him, and he said, and I haven't done the research on this, so forgive me, but he basically said that they had a draft pick they wanted to install at that spot, which made him expendable considering his cost. So it's not because this guy, trust me, is lacking in ability in a power scheme. I mean, he's a very good guard. In fact, as a run blocker, was about as good as Ron Leary last year, and the Broncos spending $9 million this year on Ron Leary. So it's a very good get, and it gives the Broncos some stability and not even a backup plan. I think that's the guy. I think he's going to be the plan moving forward, because Max Garcia, even though you talk about the power scheme and how that fits his skill set so much more than playing in the zone, he still hasn't looked great. He's still struggled. And I think that Broncos are getting frustrated with that. They need clarity. They need stability on that offensive line. And I think Barber's going to be able to give it to them.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I'll talk about it in the next segment, but I think it might spell trouble for our old friend Max Garcia.
Well, let's do it. Let's go through our Broncos camp stock report of sorts. We'll go 3 up, 3 down through 4 days of camp. 3 players whose trajectory is on the rise, and of course 3 players who really need to step it up. Will, start us off with your 3 players up.
All right, so the 3 guys up, I'm going to start with a guy I already mentioned today, and that's D'Angelo Henderson. Chris Harris Jr. praised him after practice on day 2. He's looked decisive, cuts well, looks like he fits the scheme. So I think he's a player on the rise. Definitely, I think he's going to challenge Devontae Booker for that.
Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you move on to your next guy, 100% agree. This guy is the truth. So keep an eye on D'Angelo Henderson. He's got as Vance Joseph said on Sunday, just a minor ankle tweak. He could have gone today, but they're just playing it safe. He'll be back tomorrow. Keep an eye on that kid. He is really impressing.
Right, so watch out, because he could possibly be, I don't want to call Devontae Booker something he's not, but he could end up being the Lou Gehrig to Devontae Booker's Wally Pipp early on here. But the second guy I've got on the list is Isaiah McKenzie. We talked about how fast and how athletic Carlos Henderson is, and Isaiah McKenzie is kind of the pocket-sized version of that. He switched numbers too, which we talked about how important the numbers are on your jersey. So he was 5 to start off camp, and obviously 5 is not a legal number for a wide receiver in the NFL. You're allowed to wear it in camp, but not on Sundays.
Right.
But they cut Henry Krieger-Coble. Good luck, HKC. And they gave him his number 84. So I think that's a more fitting wide receiver number for Isaiah McKenzie. Started off with 16 in college, but that's Benny Fowler's number, and I think Benny's here to stay based on early reports. But he's been really quick. He actually made a really nice play in the passing game today, and that's kind of anything that you can get out of Isaiah McKenzie in offense is kind of a bonus, because he's really on the roster to return punts. But if he can throw in like 10 to 20 receptions and a couple of big plays on offense, that's a huge deal.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at think of the Denver Broncos last year. I mean, they were both games they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. You could chalk up to their inability to stop Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
Those type of guys are extremely valuable, and the Broncos now have an offensive coordinator who knows how to utilize those guys and feature them in the offense. So Isaiah McKenzie brings so much more value than just being a returner, and we're seeing that as the days go on.
Yeah, and not to throw stones at the Kansas City Chiefs or anything, but Isaiah McKenzie is not going to cause any off-the-field trouble as well. I think he's going to stay out of the commissioner's office for the time being. But number 3, we talked about him already, DeMarcus Walker. Pretty much every time I'd say DeMarcus Walker's name, I start to say DeMarcus Ware, and then I have to correct myself. Right. But maybe that turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy, and he becomes one of the best outside edge rushers in the league. I don't know how long he's going to stick at the edge rusher position, because like I said, he's 280 pounds, and if teams figure out how to isolate a tight end or a running back on him, the Broncos are kind of toast on defense. Saw that a lot last year. Yep. But if he can provide a pretty consistent pass rush on third down let guys like Adam Gotsis take care of the early downs and then, really jump in there and provide that extra boost that they need on the interior pass rush on third downs. That's going to be a big deal. And he started off, we talked about, actually, I don't think we mentioned this, but he left
I think
camp.
It was in the notebook, yeah.
Yeah, it was in the notebook. He left camp early on day one because it was kind of bizarre, but he had, I think, heat exhaustion or anxiety or both. Right. I don't know what it
was a combo.
What I do in that situation.
From what I've learned on it, it was they chalked it up publicly to heat exhaustion, but really it was a combination of him being a little too amped up for the opportunity and not hydrating well enough. Young people, make sure you hydrate before you hit the gridiron.
Yeah, it was. I think our radars went off a little bit on that just because he spent his college career and it was only, 70-something degrees in Inglewood, Colorado on Thursday. So, that's okay. He'll rebound from that, and he has too. He's, he tipped a pass at the line, I think, a day ago, and he had I think you can't really call any sack a sack for sure, but I think according to Bill Collar, he had a sack today of, I think it was Paxton Lynch. Don't quote me on that. Yep. But he's been pretty disruptive so far, and I think that's really just what the doctor ordered for Denver's interior pass rush.
And you notice those three guys Will laid out as his 3 up, all rookies, all draft picks from this class. So that's a good sign that the Broncos made some good decisions in the spring. For me, my 3 up, one of them is a rookie, and I'll start off with him, Garrett Bowles. When you talk about a guy being the truth, Garrett Bowles has absolutely put a stranglehold on the left tackle job. I mean, Ty Sambrailo, I'll just say it now, he's the guy, one of my guys on the down. I mean, he's basically been relegated to second team, and that's where he has stayed, even 4 days into camp. Garrett Bowles still has to work on some of the mental aspects, but as Coach Joseph has talked about several times since camp began, when it comes to Garrett Bowles, knowing the play and just going and blocking his man, he is getting it done, whether it's in the run game or in pass protection. He's really taken to some of the info and instruction from Von Miller, from Shane Ray, in terms of bolstering his pass sets and not being quite as willing to give up inside plays, because he has the athleticism and he has the foot speed to kick out and beat guys around the edge. But he really struggled in college with savvy opponents, double move, beating him on the inside. So great progress. The Broncos drafted him in the first round with some controversy. Not everyone was very happy with that pick, but I think early returns are they've made a good decision. My second guy, you mentioned him, Benny Fowler. I wrote about it several times leading up to the beginning of training camp that Benny Fowler, I wasn't sold on where he fit in this time around, but he's healthy, and I think the message that was sent on draft day with 2 receivers going for the Broncos was heard loud and clear. Benny Fowler has been very impressive, and right now he has a firm lock on that number 3 receiver job, even more so than guys like Jordan Taylor. When not necessarily talking about slot, but just talking about depth chart order. Benny Fowler at number 3, he's putting in better work right now than Jordan Taylor and some of the other competition. So good for Benny. He's a former undrafted guy out of Michigan State. Had a great 2015 kind of breakout season. Not breakout, but where he really he made the final roster and really established himself.
Made some huge plays, too. He made that huge play in the playoffs against the Steelers. And I don't think they win that game without that. I think it was like a 35-yard third down reception. So that was huge, really.
Plus, he had the 2-point conversion to seal the deal in the Super Bowl. So He had that great 2015, but 16 he was plagued by injuries from the drop. And so it's good to see him pick up some momentum. And then my last guy on 3 up is Lorenzo Doss. Now, I'm a little hesitant to get too excited about the progress or the happenings around Lorenzo Doss, because last year this time he was doing the same things, making play after play on the ball, interceptions, pass breakups. He's a guy who always has had a nose for the ball. You go back and look at any of his college tape at Tulane. I mean, that guy was an interception machine, a veritable ball hawk. But he's just, with the depth chart being, so top heavy, he's had a hard time really cracking the starting lineup. He did get some reps last year. I did a film breakdown on him for Mile High Huddle earlier this year. Go check that out if you're a premium member. But he got on the field last year and he did well. The opposing quarterbacks targeted him, of course, because he was young and inexperienced. They knew from their scouting what to do there. But he, for the most part, he held his own. And it's encouraging here with also the Broncos drafting a player at his position in the 3rd round in Brendan Langley. He heard that message. They cut his Tulane homeboy, Torian Nixon. So I think he's really taken to this spirit of competition and trying to find a place for himself in the no-fly zone as that number 4 cornerback. So, Will, your 3 down.
Right. So I talked about D'Angelo Henderson being my first guy up, and so I think the corresponding move is to put Devontae Booker down. It's hard to say it's really his fault that he hurt his wrist, and I don't know the circumstances surrounding it. I heard it kind of happen as a result of lifting weights and then aggravating it in practice.
Yeah, this is something he's been nursing since May, and then they thought they could get by and that the time off would be enough to get by, but he aggravated it, so they went in, did an X-ray, and realized the damage, and here we are.
Yeah, so you don't necessarily want to say that that's a guy's fault, and some of that kind of goes to the training staff for putting him out there that early, but they don't know. So, but either way, it's tough to get your job back when you're out for however long, 6 to 8 weeks. And then you've got a rookie coming out of nowhere and really impressing guys like D'Angelo Henderson. So I can't, put that squarely on Booker's shoulders, but that's just kind of how things work in professional sports. Yep. And then second of all, we talked about Allan Barber too, and I think the corresponding move there is to say Max Garcia is down now.
Agreed.
He definitely fits in that power scheme, and he's a really good run blocker. We saw him clear the lane on big runs back in 2015, especially on that C.J. Anderson run that beat the Patriots in overtime. But he struggled as a pass blocker. He hasn't necessarily been consistent. He hasn't really ever won the job flat out necessarily. He was splitting time with Evan Mathis his rookie year, and then I don't want to say anybody in 2016 even won the job aside from Matt Paradis at center. I don't think anybody really won the job flat out on the offensive line. I think that was just kind of a win by default situation. So I think now that he's got pretty legitimate veteran competition, I think he's got to be on the lookout a little bit for his job, at least as a starter, and maybe not, on the roster as a whole. I think that's kind of a stretch early.
Definitely.
But then to round out the third guy down, I know this is a guy that's on your list, but I really couldn't leave him off of my list just because it needs to be emphasized times 2.
It's glaring.
And that's Ty Sambrailo. He's not going to be the starting left tackle, and I really hope he's not, because we're going to be down to Kyle Sloter taking snaps by week 3.
Right.
They saw how quickly, in that Kansas City Chiefs game, he wasn't touching Justin Houston. He was obliterating Trevor Siemian, and he got Trevor Siemian almost knocked out of that game in the second quarter there, and they had to put in Donald Stevenson to kind of clean up the damage. But
plus, he's the reason Vaughn didn't get the sack crown. I mean,
right.
He gave up 3, if I remember correctly, at least 3. I'm pretty sure 3. Anyway, of Vic Beasley's 3.5 sacks he got that game, which really, up to that point in Vic Beasley's career, he was on the verge of bust territory, and that was his coming out party, and he snowballed it and was able to capitalize, which is good for him. But unfortunate, Will, that it was at the expense of Sambrailo and the Broncos.
Yeah, I think that just proves that if you're an edge rusher, especially in your second year, and you need a pickup game, just play the Broncos and keep going at their right tackle, and I think you'll get 4 or 5 sacks pretty easily. Not to name names on the Oakland Raiders or anything, but Ty Sambrailo is in trouble. He's really struggled, and I know everybody struggles against Von Miller. Menelik Watson struggles against Von Miller, but he is not even. He had drills where he didn't touch Von Miller.
Yep.
And Ty Sambrailo is not necessarily a big, powerful, strong guy at left tackle. And his strength needs to be his leverage, A, and B, quick feet. And if you're not touching a guy, that's typically a sign of having feet that just aren't quick enough. And if you're not strong and your feet aren't quick enough to even be in the right spot, that's a pretty bad combination for a left tackle.
I agree. And as Will mentioned, Ty Sambrailo also on my list. And I think one of the big reasons for it, too, is he's lost a lot of confidence over the last 18 months of real time. And a lot of that had to do with just being unhealthy for so long. And then in comes the shiny new rookie first rounder that takes his job. and his confidence is just in the doldrums. And Cecil Lammey put this out there earlier, I think it was Saturday, that he sees Ty Sambrailo on the outside looking in, not even making the roster. And while I'm a little hesitant to jump on that bandwagon quite yet, he has certainly already played himself into that bubble territory, which is, for a former second rounder, it's just not something that you want to see from an organizational standpoint. And then my second guy down, Carlos Henderson, we've talked about him. And again, I don't want to freak everybody out. I'm not really giving up on this guy. I'm not saying hit the panic button, but it is, to me, a guy who was so productive and prolific in college and a third-round pick to boot, to be struggling this severely, this early in camp. So hopefully he can really turn it around soon. And then lastly, for me, Paxton Lynch. I'm tired of making excuses for this kid. All the talent in the world. And even though, props to him for getting out to a good start, he has not looked good since the pads have gone on. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. I mean, that, as Vance Joseph talked about ad nauseum on Sunday, I mean, that's where football is played. It's played in pads. And he's just got to figure out a way to, when he does fail, when he does make a bad play or make a bad decision, even if it's not a pick six, he's got to forget it and move on and overcome that. But Paxton Lynch, to me, it might be a short-term trajectory, but for now, he is the third guy on my list, Will, of being down.
Right, and we talked about it earlier, but so much of succeeding later in your career is being able to deal with the failures that you're going to have inevitably as a young quarterback, because young quarterbacks, when you throw them out, even if you sit them on the bench and let them learn for a little bit, there's going to be huge mistakes in your first, 25 games of starting before you really start to clean it up. But every quarterback's going to have a really bad pick six. Aaron Rodgers will even threw a pick six not his rookie year, but his first year starting. And I don't think he's thrown one since then, but I think that proves that anybody can do it. And it's really not about the mistakes that you make, but it's about not letting that snowball, learning from that, and then, not letting it happen in the future. And so we haven't quite seen that with Paxton Lynch yet. We've seen it to some extent with Trevor Siemian, although, he struggled at times too, and he's let bad quarters during the bad games as well, like we saw against the Kansas City Chiefs and the New England Patriots later in the season. But I think especially for Lynch, confidence, first of all, and having a short memory, those are two really big keys to him winning the starting job.
Yeah, the pressure's getting to him a little bit, I think, and it'll be key to his future as a Broncos quarterback, how he can deal with it, overcome that pressure, and thrive. Use that pressure as fuel to overcome it and thrive. So, all right, before we get out of here, let's take a quick question or two from the Mile High Mailbag. We are your football priests, here to offer absolution and answers to your burning Broncos questions, and we always enjoy, of course, engaging with you, our listeners. Now, today's question comes from Jacob Smith. He asks, and it's Broncos related, but he says, how does the Xavier Rhodes deal affect the no-fly zone with Roby coming due and Harris Jr. soon after? For those who missed it, Vikings cornerback Xavier Rhodes signed a 5-year, $70 million deal. How does that affect Roby and Harris? Eventually the Broncos are going to have to pay Roby. They won't do it while Aqib Talib is still on the roster, but they have this year and 2018 to figure it out. They can still control Roby beyond 2018 with the franchise tag. But as for Harris, he's still got plenty of time. Denver locked him down through 2019. Harris will be turning 31 when his contract expires. Plenty of time left. Will, your answer for Jacob?
I wouldn't worry about it too much. I definitely wouldn't lose sleep over it at this point in 2017 while you still have Roby, like you said, until the end of the 2018 season if they decide to use the franchise tag, and then Chris Harris Jr. Until 2019.
Yep.
And I think Chris Harris Jr. is here for the long haul. I think he's definitely a 3-contract guy in Denver, and I think he's going to go down as probably, I don't know. I think he'd put Champ Bailey probably number one. I think at number one as far as Broncos cornerbacks. And I think you'd probably make a case to put Chris Harris Jr. number two, and we'll have a better picture of that at the end of his career, but I don't think that's unreasonable to say at this point.
No.
So I think they're going to keep him here for the long haul, and he's probably going to be, if not a full, career Bronco, at least, finish out 3 contracts in Denver, which is a big deal, especially for an undrafted guy.
Oh, yeah.
And I think even if you let Roby walk, which I don't know if they will, I think eventually they'll just let Talib go especially after the 2018 season, because, he's not a young guy anymore. But you have to trust that LA and the staff is able to replace those guys. They draft guys like Brendan Langley in the 3rd round. When cornerbacks, especially not an immediate need, they do that for a reason. It's because, they have a contingency plan in case, one of those guys gets injured, or you have to let them walk in free agency because they got a better deal somewhere else. And that happens, It's not just the draft too, John Elway has been really good at finding guys in free agency for less than the guy who he let walk got. Or if it's an equal deal, he upgrades the position, like we saw with Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie walking and then bringing in Aqib Talib. So that's been definitely one of his strong suits as a general manager. And so I think you have to trust that, if one of those guys is priced out of another contract in Denver, that they can be replaced and the legacy of the no-fly zone continues. Absolutely.
And last question, and then we'll get out of here, comes from Mile High Maniac on Twitter. His question, how's Menelik Watson looking? From what I hear, Watson has been kind of up and down, still acclimating a little bit to life at altitude, but he's going to settle in. He's made more than a few notebooks with his power and physicality, and I mean, this guy in full pads, dude just looks like an absolute monster. But Will, you worried about Watson at all?
Not yet. I think he was always a question mark as a free agent prospect, just because he's only played 27 games since the Raiders drafted him out of Florida State in the 2nd round in 2013. He really hasn't been able to stay healthy, and he missed the entire 2015 season. And then he went down, I think, in week 1 against the Saints when the Raiders beat the Saints on that 2-point conversion game last year to kind of get their run going. But I think it's kind of interesting that you bring up altitude, because he's a guy who's spent his whole life in Manchester, England, which I've been there, and that's definitely on sea level, if not a little bit below it. It's right next to the water, so no altitude there. And then, like DeMarcus Walker, he's in Tallahassee, and we know Tallahassee's not known for its mountain ranges. It's a pretty swampy environment.
Yep.
And then Oakland, California is about as sea level adjacent as you can get, because they're right on the water. And that's not somewhere where you have to worry about the thin air. So it's his first time living at altitude, as far as I know, and I don't know, if he's moved inside and outside of England or the United Kingdom area. But that's something to get adjusted to, especially for a big guy like him. And, it's a tough job playing right tackle in the AFC West, because, especially for the Broncos, you're getting Von Miller every day in practice. And then against the Chiefs, you're getting Justin Houston. You're getting Khalil Mack against the Raiders. I think you're getting
Bosa.
Not sure exactly where. Yeah, Bosa or Melvin Ingram against the Chargers. And those are 2 guys that you have to worry about. Don't get talked about quite as much as the other guys. But I think the key there is, having a good attitude, because you're not going to win every time against those guys, and you just kind of have to, live with, sometimes you get beat. Hopefully you get tight end help. Hopefully you get help from the running backs, and they'll scheme a way to help you out on the right side. And that's something that Gary Kubiak wasn't necessarily good at doing, but we'll see if, as evidenced by the Ty Sambrailo Falcons game and the Michael Schofield Raiders game. But we'll see if Mike McCoy does a better job of helping out his right tackles against those tough edge rushers. So if he can just keep a good attitude about it, I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, I'm not worried.
Healthy too, I should say.
I'm not worried about Menelik Watson beyond just staying healthy. I mean, he's just settling in himself, coming off of some injuries. So don't worry about him quite yet. But that's all the time we have for today's show. With training camp here, we're going to be trying to keep up with the content and the news as often as we can. We'll check in with you at least twice a week, with Will and I, of course, one show, and Nick and Carl on the other. But, when we can get in some extra episodes, we will, so stay tuned. Follow the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Find Will in the Twitterverse at WillKeys6, myself at Chad N. Jensen. Continue to tweet us your questions, and we will try to address your concerns on the show as often as we can. And don't forget to subscribe, y'all. For Will, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.